you a presenter.
Okay. Let me make sure, get my screen going. How's that looking?
Oh, look at that. Olaf is actually on here. Mr. Olaf, how are you? He said thanks for the shout out. Always cool when people come out. Probably late for them too, right?
Yeah, I think Netherlands,
7
what,
p.m.
yeah, it's about 7 hours forward, 6 hours forward. Uh, how's that looking though? The slides coming through okay?
Looks perfect. Well,
Great.
we'll start here in about 3 minutes, but yeah, you're all set.
Awesome.
I did after we did our talk about attack evals and APT 29 and Cozy Bear, I did a talk at Jungle event about it using what C2 did I use there? I think I did Posh C2. But version 6. I don't think you guys had version 6 when you did yours, right?
No, it was I think it was still in either late 4 or 5. I think it might have been. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's fun. I take advantage of these talks to spend more time with some of these C2s, but all those PowerShell scripts that you put up on that GitHub also make it like way easier to do. It's like load PowerShell, execute PowerShell, and that's step 12.
Yeah, as I think the chain of thanks keeps going on forward, because like I say, I gotta thank like Matt Graber for obviously all the PowerShell help online, but then also like all the great reporting. And so a lot of it was just looking at Intel and like, oh, I can retype that. That's not too hard. It's kind of like a almost stenographer type job. And I'll talk about that a little bit in our talk too. But yeah, definitely appreciate all the feedback, and hopefully that was a fun experience.
Yeah, no, it was great. And that's the thing, like, I think a lot, like the technical folks, they obviously go to look for the detection stuff, but
yeah,
like that GitHub that has the adversary emulation plan is like gold. It has all the PowerShell scripts. It tells you step by step what to do. I don't think a lot of people have seen that. So, so awesome work to you on that.
yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, I think any way we can help the community, I guess I think that was one of our big lessons learned from round 1 to round 2, was like being more transparent, and like how many people. I think we just hit like I think 100 stars the other day, which is awesome. Like people are actually taking advantage of that and rolling with it. So definitely more to come on that vein. That was glad to hear people, their communities actually, that's something that we can add and maybe promote more people to do something like that. You guys have been doing the same thing with Scythe, and I've been following the GitHub page with the emulation plans. Those have been great.
Yeah. Yeah, the emulation plans are good. This week I'm doing Orange Worm, which is targeted the healthcare industry. We're doing this partnership with them to kind of help the healthcare industry, evaluate where they are. And Orange Worm is interesting because they live off the land like hardcore. So the emulation plan is like 30 steps of just like net commands, command commands, net sh, etc. But once you get them all there, they work. It's just like, how do I do this? But anyway, it's the top of the hour, so I guess we will formally start. So anyone that was on here listening to our pre-show, catching up, I obviously know Jamie, and now you all should know Jamie as well. Follow him. He is Jamie Antisocial. Like literally do that right now. Go on Twitter, look up the name, and follow, because he is awesome just as a person. And professionally, he's an engineer at MITRE, which I'm sure most of you have heard, right? All of you have heard of MITRE ATT&CK. If you haven't, you should. If you're more in the vulnerability space, I'm sure you've heard of the Common Vulnerability Exposures program and just all the phenomenal work that MITRE does. In particular, ATT&CK is big though. Jamie works also in the adversary emulation side, doing the attack evals. If you were on here a little earlier, we were talking about Cozy Bear, which is APT 29, and how they did all that. So welcome, Jamie. We're looking forward to your talk, and thank you as always for giving back to the community and being here with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you for being here. Like I said, first off, I wanted to thank obviously the whole Grim team for setting this up. I know like those I've interacted with have done a great job, and obviously everything behind the scenes. It really does take a community to kind of put this together. So really thank you. And obviously it's an honor to be here. And thanks for the plug there, George. Like I said, really appreciate all the feedback. It's like happy to be a part of the community and help out where we can. So as you may have saw, I'm here to talk about the hard lessons learned I've had from emulating adversaries. Like I said, MITRE and MITRE ATT&CK, we've done a lot of research in this space. So happy to share what we've learned, hopefully make other efforts a little easier and kind of learn from our lessons and kind of help your emulation efforts be that much more successful. So going forward, do a quick introduction. Not as cool as the last intro slide, but I tried where I can. Name's Jaime Williams, engineer at MITRE, like George said. Leads on attack and attack evaluations. And like I said, I won't go into deep dive on all that. It's just, like I said, it's a little bit of the background and medium for a lot of what I'm talking about today. So I kind of touch those as I go. But big thing too is, you know, I have my name on a lot of stuff. It's been great. I've been able to do some really cool things, but mostly it's been because other people have taken me under their wing and, like, you know, spent the time to share what they know, give me opportunities to touch things, you know, add my own flair to it. So I definitely appreciate what GRIMMCon's doing here with the new speakers track. Like I said, really, let's keep that going, guys. Like that's awesome. Let's always open up, share what you know. You never know what you might inspire someone else to do, or they maybe you know, pass the baton to the next generation. So I've definitely been really appreciative of the experience and the people that I've had a chance to work with. And also GRIMMCon, love the spooky theme. I'm a big Halloween nerd, a big horror movie nerd. So I had a little bit of fun putting this deck together with the themes and all the little gifts here and there. So I'll try to make this a fun talk. Hopefully that shows. So like I said, major component of the talk is, you know, lessons learned emulating adversaries. So before we dive any further, just I want to take a second to talk about, like, what is adversary emulation. Like I said before, when me and George was chatting before this talk, adversary emulation is a subset of offensive assessments. Like I said, they all kind of have their place. You know, there's a time and a place to do a tabletop. There's a time and place to do a vulnerability assessment. You know, a pin test or red team. They all kind of have their purposes. But adversary emulation in particular is very interesting because what we're doing is we're overlaying what a typical red team would do with intelligence. So we're basically, you know, telling red team, you know, rather than just getting on keyboard and doing what you do and being great, let's try to mimic and actually execute the specific behaviors of a very particular threat. So whether that be an adversary group or malware or just a particular scenario, let's scope this down to a very particular, like, adversary that we're going to emulate. Reason you would want to do this, 4-prong here at the bottom of the deck, you can see biggest thing is realism. Like you said, it's you know, adversary emulation, you're not going to, you know, you're probably not going to tease out any like 0 days or anything like that. But what you're really going to be assessing is the more common day-to-day brute scenario. Like, you know, an adversary could easily, you know, download a bunch of proprietary software, reverse it, find some bugs, and go attack those. That's a real threat vector you need to worry about. But on a day-to-day basis, it's probably more likely that you or someone in your organization is going to, you know, click on something they shouldn't and probably expose you to some threat. So really what we're trying to aim for in adversary emulation is an exercise to see, you know, what would happen if. And a lot of those ifs are very, very realistic situations. But like you said, we even have the intel to tell you how realistic that is. And I already kind of touched on this. Adversary emulation is actually really great for scoping as well. It takes you down from the full universe of things to assess. Like, so there's so many technologies, there's so many different behaviors that you could use for an assessment. But adversary emulation kind of brings it down to something that's more tangible. Let's say you're emulating a very particular scenario, very particular set of QTPs. So it kind of gives you kind of something more actionable to kind of, you know, I guess rest on. Third point, diversity. Like I said, I'll get into this one a lot, so I'm going to kind of maybe touch on this a little lighter right now. But makes you do things that you probably wouldn't have done otherwise. Like I said, a lot of red teamers, a lot of pen testers kind of get in their groove. They get really good at things. They know what they're good at. You have to kind of maybe rest on that a little more than you should. So, you know, bringing in some new pizzazz, like learning about some new professional adversaries, seeing what they do, and incorporating that into your repertoire is also very beneficial. And then finally, biggest thing for, like I said, attack evaluations, what we're doing there is, you know, executing the same scenario against 20 to 30 vendors. So in this case, repeatability is huge. We need something that we can execute over and over again, not just across vendors, but also across time. Like you said, a lot of assessment teams are responsible for more or less change management. So over time, you know, you execute something on day 0, capture the results, do it again 100 days, a year later, make sure, you know, you're able to quickly quantify the change, but also make sure all the change is in the right direction, that you're actually all the changes that you're making as an organization are for the better, not worse. So repeatability is really key there. Like you said, you'll see as they output a lot of our admin simulation work, we have these like really defined and really tangible plans that you're able to, like what me and George were talking about before, do over and over again. So a little background on our adversary simulation work. Like I said, we've had some modest success over the last couple of years. I think just about 3 years ago, we released the first adversary simulation plan. It was APT3. Since then, we've been doing some really neat stuff. Like I said, adversary simulation via attack evaluations, where, like I said, we execute this against vendors and capture how they detect and going forward protect against all of these individual techniques from an adversary. So we've learned a bunch about, like, how to go about the process, and we created some really interesting products. So, as you can see here, thanks to our web team, we put together some just high-level overviews of, what an adversary simulation, in this case, this is AP29, what those steps look like. And then from there, like we were talking about before, we put together these really nuanced adversary simulation plans, where, like in this case, we're able to give you a step-by-step breakdown of what exactly we did for attack evaluations. For each step, from the attacker perspective, what you're doing, what you're expected to execute. Big thing is cited intelligence. So, that third column, why we're actually doing each one of those steps. So linking back to the actual intelligence that, APT29 describes what they actually did that we're emulating for that step. We've learned a bunch about, like we were talking about before, the community, the importance of community. So typically for these plans, we do open invites for intelligence, where, like you said, we put out a call saying, we want anyone in the community that has intelligence that kind of matches this mold, we'd happily ingest it and kind of consider it for our plan. So as you can see in that fourth column, we have, people like Microsoft, Kaspersky, SentinelOne have been sending great intelligence. And going forward, we have some additional contributions. So thank you for those. And then finally, my favorite column, that last one, kind of this links to what George was talking about before, our GitHub repo, where we actually point to the code that you need to execute each individual step. So in this case, just calling out that bottom one, you can go and find that PowerShell function, which is invoke exfil, which is emulating a little bit of the collection exfil from this part of the AP29 implementation. So in this case, it's downloading 7-zip, installing it, encrypting and compressing a folder, and then it exfils it over a mapped drive to a attacker-controlled web dev share. So you're able to actually see the granularity from full cradle to grave, seeing, like, what we're trying to do, why we're doing it, and then exactly how we're doing it. That said, we've had some really cool successes, but we've also had some really big goofs. Like I said, it's pretty human, so no big deal. But it's not very often that you could say that you made a mistake that Microsoft decided to write a blog about. But in the best way possible. Like I said, this blog, I put the link in the bottom there. It's actually a really interesting read. It's not just like, hey, you're an idiot, but it's also like a really good deep dive on, in this case, as part of the APT29 emulation plan, one of the steps was to reflectively load a binary and execute it from memory, which sounds really awesome. It actually, half the time, or at least most of the time, it's really awesome. As you can see from the flowchart, it loads it into memory, patches some functions, and then executes the binary, and then returns. Everything's good to go. But the thing we didn't consider was what happens with ETW, or event tracer for Windows, is present. And event tracer for Windows, it happens to call some of those same functions, which, as you can imagine, a race condition happens and the process crashes. So that was a really good experience. Like I said, I'll tie that in later on how that applies to our lessons learned. But like I said, a lot of these lessons are coming from, both positive experiences and then kind of those kind of swift kicks in the butt that you have to take, kind of take your notches over time and learn from. And I'll tie that in later. But long story short, like I said, I talked about this with George a couple weeks ago on Thursday, but emulation comes down to 3 main steps. They're pretty simple. Like we said, you choose an adversary, you research that adversary, and you develop and execute a plan to emulate that adversary. And 3 lessons learned I've identified today kind of align with one of those 3 steps. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and dive into it. So first big lesson learned was based on choosing an adversary, and particularly there is no one big emulation to rule them all. So if you missed the Lord of the Rings reference there, basically what I'm saying is adversary emulation is not a one and done deal. It's not something where you're going to make this perfect emulation plan that satisfies all the requirements. What we've kind of realized, especially after putting the APT3 emulation plan out, was that every emulation is special. It's an opportunity to capture, some unique scenario. Like I said, there's so much work going on in the adversary emulation, like within industry. Like I said, like we're working on it, others are, and there's all these great products going out. And it's not just because we're all trying to race or compete or solve the hard problem first, because it really is, it's not just solving a hard problem. It's a chance to capture, some tangible, unique product. And in case of adversary emulation, what we're doing is every product or every emulation plan is special in the sense that it has it's some unique combination of techniques or some unique scenario that is very, like you said, it's unique and it's special in its own way, in the sense that it's it's applying some threat or some something that your cut will resonate with your customer. It's actually capturing that and applying it. So the biggest thing we learned is it's not something that we're just gonna do a couple times and be over. It's something that it's more of an artistic. It's very fluid. Something you're gonna do over and over again, based on whatever the latest threats are. Like I said, threat and intel is coming out every day, so it's we definitely don't see this this chain of demand signal ever drying out. And to kind of foot stop that point, I'm gonna do a quick road trip, I guess field trip to attack, to kind of highlight this point a little different. Like I said, biggest thing here is techniques are like onions. If you cool points, if you get the Shrek reference there, but so I'll kind of dive into this in a second. But this, just for background, this is our attack matrix. This is like George was saying earlier, MITRE ATT&CK is a adversary knowledge base of what real adversaries are doing in the wild. So this is actually a really great resource if you're starting off in the adversary emulation space. Definitely a good place, just because everything here is real adversary behavior. So it's kind of almost like your cheat sheet for what real adversaries are doing. Just kind of orient you to what we're looking at here. This is a typical form way we present it. It's called the matrix. So across the top, what we have are called tactics. These are basically how an adversary, or I'm sorry, what an adversary is trying to achieve, basically aligning with objectives. So it's very similar to what you would see in like a kill chain, all the different steps in the kill chain. But in reality, adversaries don't operate in very linear paths. So we try to respect that and kind of capture that. Adversaries may jump around. They may do things. They may do some priv-ask here. They might do some collection here, and they kind of are a little more fluid than a typical linear progression. But what makes the attack special or kind of different than a typical kill chain is coming down from all those tactics. We have what we call techniques. These are how an adversary would actually achieve those objectives. So in this case, I'm going to highlight process injection. So you can see here, process injection is something an adversary would do to inject arbitrary code into a separate process. Particularly, as you see the tactics align with it, it's for the purposes of either elevating privileges, so injecting in something that has permissions that the original malicious process doesn't have, or evading defenses, like these evil.exe running of the process is probably something that the defender would quickly see. But if evil.exe is able to inject into something like chrome.exe, not a lot of defenders are going to see Chrome and immediately think that's malicious. But like I said, a lot of times when we do adversary emulation, we look at like what techniques are you doing. That's a quick fallacy, because like I said, even as of last week, even before then, we have these concepts of sub-techniques. So opening up process injection, there's so many different ways that you can execute process injection. And now actually with attack sub-techniques, we're actually capturing that, where these sub-techniques are capturing more specific implementations of that same process injection technique. So diving a bit second layer into a technique, we pick something like DLL injection, where it has its own basic universe of different variations of how you can do a DLL injection. So like I said, if you look at attack structure from the top here, you can see a breakout of what we mean by DLL injection. But even in this case, if you look at the first two procedural examples or real world implementations of that technique, you're able to see two very different implementations of process injection. The first being ARIA body, which looks like, based on the report I was able to dig up on this one, it looks like there's three main options for how it does injection. It either injects into run DL32 straight, it injects into run DL32 with some flavor of UAC bypass. So it looks like it's a priv-ask and an injection at the same time. And then the third one, I'm assuming, I didn't dive too deep into this one, but it looks like it's doing a bit of a mass injection. So either you're able to pick whatever process you want to inject to, or it's injecting itself into a bunch of different processes besides Explorer. Either way, this is a big variant on that technique, especially compared to the second one, Black Energy, which is, this one's actually really fascinating as well. Black Energy is running as a driver, so it's more or less kind of a rootkit, but it does do some injection capability back to user space into an SVC host. So, I mean, actually the authors of the report were a little confused why they would do that. But long story short, like I said, emulating even just at a technique level, there's so much variance and so much uniqueness, diving a step beyond that down to the sub techniques and down to procedures. So like I said, even if you say like, hey, you know, I've already emulated process injection, that in itself is a problematic statement because there's just so much under the hood there as you get closer and closer to the actual adversary. And then even taking a step higher too, even adversaries have layers. Like I said, at the technique layer, at the technique level, there's so many different layers and so many different aspects. But even at looking at it from a higher level, like an adversary, in this case, what I have on the left here is our attack navigator, which allows you to annotate, or basically fancy word for put colors on an attack. So you're able to make your own layers and kind of highlight things. In this case, I've highlighted all of the techniques associated with APT28. And as you can see here, there's a full spectrum of techniques, and most of which in realism, you're not going to capture all of that in one emulation plan. So you kind of have to be wary of, even if I did an emulation of APT28, there's so much more nuance to be captured because more than likely I didn't capture everything, especially when you consider this is just APT28. APT28 uses a lot of malware, in this case, 20 different samples. So and you go and do a full overlay of all of that, the universe of all of the behaviors associated with APT28 is much more broad and something that you're not just going to like, you know, do once and be done. Because like I said, this is kind of a reflection of APT28 over time. There's so many different aspects of, you know, they could have done a certain subset in one campaign, another one in another campaign. And then this is just as of now, like I said, APT28 could do more things going forward that we have to reflect on future emulation. So long story short, the point I'm trying to make is, you know, this is going to sound like really cheesy dating advice, but there's plenty of fish in the sea. Like you said, emulating an adversary is not something that you're just going to like, you know, swoop through and do once. You kind of have to be very relevant of the fluidity and the dynamic element of, you know, how we describe a group or a campaign. But also, like I said before, you know, we pick adversaries. We picked APT3, 29, and going forward, Carbonec and Pin7 for evaluations. But that might not be the best fit for you. So one of the biggest things too is, you know, there's a lot of nuance and a lot of considerations when you're picking, you know, what adversary you want to emulate. That's why there's so much great work going on in the space, because there's not just like, you know, some algorithm for the ultimate adversary. Like every use case and every customer has a different flair for, you know, what adversary might resonate with them the most. And just some considerations there would be, you know, relevance. Like you said, I think we picked ABT29 and 3 just because they had the most universal relevance. But, you know, say you work in, like I think George said earlier, he worked in the finance sector. I imagine a lot of the fin groups would be a lot more relevant there. Whereas if you're maybe a government organization, there's a whole different spectrum based on geography, whether, you know, if you're in a certain part of the world, there may be certain actors that are just more prevalent. Or you could look at your own logs and say, you know, we see this group all the time, you know, they might not be reported in public space, but they are hitting us all the time. So they're probably the best emulation target for our particular use case. Second point would be variance. Like I said, I think one of the things that's been really great about the adversary emulation process up to now is we've been able to bounce between groups that had very different MOs, they had very different SOPs. So you're able to compare and contrast, like, you know, what ABT3 did versus ABT29 are completely different. Like I said, there was small overlaps here and there, but being able to apply like a very diverse and kind of very, very broad flavor of TTPs to our customers, that's been really great. And then finally, available intelligence. You can't emulate what you can't describe. So a lot of it comes down to what do you have enough intelligence and what enough intel to actually emulate. That might be a big part of your decision factor. And it's actually a really good segue to my second point, is getting into the research aspect. You got to really have a really good key on how, knowing where and how to harvest intelligence. Like I said, there's so much like open source intelligence out there. Like I said, this is just a quick sample of what's gone into our most recent release of attack. Like I said, if you pick an adversary group name and Google it, there's probably at least 2 or 3 reports on them that are really great and like a really good starting point for putting together an emulation plan. Like I said, and even attack itself, we've kind of curated a lot of this intelligence into, you know, over 100 profiles for groups and over close to 500 and growing profiles based on specific malware. But, and I said, this, I'm not knocking this great intelligence is really important, really vital, but you kind of have to, as you're going through all that intelligence, be very wary and very cognizant of what we have to call the biases or the shortcomings. Like I said, at the end of the day, one of the best things I heard was, at the end of the day, like a lot of open source intelligence is really just marketing. It's great, like I said, not knocking anyone for putting it out there, but you kind of have to be very wary of all of the gotchas that may hit you when you're going through this intelligence. Specifically, you got to think about the vendors, the reporters that are putting the information out. You know, typically in the sense of like, you know, headlines and marketing, are you really going to report all the routine things? Are you going to report like the typically ordinary things? I'm not saying it's bad not to, but it's like, you know, it costs money to put those free reports out there. So they might not touch on things, you know, that happen all the time or the same thing over and over again. So it might be a little bit of a cognitive bias there on, you know, what gets reported. There's actually a really great report that came out a couple of weeks ago on how underrepresented APT attacks are against individuals. Like, you know, we always see these reports about, you know, group hacks a bank, they hacked a government organization, they hacked some type of political organization, but like we really don't see a lot of reports about, you know, these threat groups targeting specific individuals, which they do all the time. We just don't get a lot of intel about that because it doesn't resonate with such a wide audience. So not saying this is anyone's fault or anything like that. It's just when you're harvesting this intelligence and you're building these ABT plans and kind of considering everything, you kind of have to keep that in your back of your mind and factor it into, you know, what am I missing? Same thing. So the second point here is, you know, every report, you can't rely that it's going to have every relevant detail, especially when you're getting down to the science of emulating an adversary. There's so much nuance in trying to do things the exact same way the adversary did. So you kind of have to be very cognizant of, you know, there's more information than this report. Like, so this report was written by a human that, you know, was trying to summarize things. So they and, you know, whether or not it was malicious or not, and probably wasn't, there's some corners they skipped. There's some things that it just didn't happen to mention. There's some things that are really vital that just didn't make its way to this report. So I kind of have to be aware and be willing to look for that stuff. But also, along that same vein, people can only report what they see. Often, like I said, a lot of these reports are based on, you know, particular product. So, you know, whether it's, you know, the vendor of that product reporting what they saw, or in a lot of cases, a lot of the reporters are coming in from more of an IR or like triage perspective. They're coming in after the breach. So there's just only so much that they can see. So you kind of have to be aware of, you know, the full spectrum of the actual breach that you're trying to emulate, and how much of that, whatever report you're looking at, how much realistically did they actually cover, and are they able to authoritatively speak towards, versus how much do you actually kind of have to focus on filling in. And speaking on filling in, one of the biggest lessons I had has been, you know, in COVID world, definitely wash your hands, wear a mask, but you got to be willing to get your hands dirty in terms of intel. Like you said, a lot of these reports, they're really great. They cover exactly what the adversary did. But like you said, there's a little bit more meat on the bone that, you know, with a couple extra steps, you can actually go and tease out. So in this case, a lot of reports are really excellent, and they have like a full, you know, coverage of everything that happened. But at the bottom, they'll have this IOC section with a bunch of hashes. You can very quickly go and like take one of those hashes, even if you can't get a sample of the actual malware. Like in my case, I have a free subscription to VirusTotal, but drop that in VirusTotal and check it out. Like I said, you can see, check out the details tab where even if you're not able to download and take a look at the actual malware, you can see some static analysis. Like in this case, we're looking at the import table and seeing, you know, what DLLs did the sample load, and then from there opening up and seeing, you know, what specific APIs did it load. In this case, be able to quickly map that to, I don't know what the sample actually does, but I don't know whether or not it was reported in whatever intel it was covered by. It looks like it's doing some type of registry manipulation as well as some access token manipulation. Like it has, you know, a couple of APIs that are very indicative of very specific adversary behaviors, as well as there's also a great tab for community. We're able to take a look and say, you know, in this case, someone was able to run, you know, an associated or the same sample through a sandbox and was able to like output the report. Where in this case, you can go to that AnyRun URL and actually see this malware executing in a sandbox and able to take a look at like the process tree and what it actually looks like running on disk. All this being just the point of teasing out more details that might not have been captured in the original report. And then I don't know if Nick Carr coined this term, but tweet TP. Like I said, I kind of was kicking and screaming my way into Twitter. I wasn't a big fan, but throughout this process, I've learned like the Twitter is truly magical when it comes to intelligence. Like I said, one of my favorite parts of the APT29 plan was the credit dump we did with WMI. And to credit Matt Dunwoody, like I said, that was 100% based on a tweet from him. Like FireEye had a thread of, you know, getting to the point of adversaries grow over time. They had put out their original reports on APT29, and since that time, they had just a full thread of things they've seen since, or things that didn't make their way to the report. So I definitely credit this tweet itself into my personal favorite part of the APT29 plan. But this isn't just like a spotty, like sometimes thing. Like pretty much every day, there's a whole new wealth of new intelligence available on Twitter. Like I said, just the other day we saw this cool one. I don't know, someone tweeted out the trick bot doing virtualization sandbox evasion by checking the victim screen resolution. Like I never would have thought of that as a procedure to test, but like I said, just being social and getting online and like kind of knowing where to look and how to comb through Twitter has been very advantageous. And final point, final lesson here is follow the yellow brick road. What I mean by that is you are not your adversary. Like I said, that's one of the biggest paradigm shifts we see from going from like red teaming to adversary simulation is red teaming is very focused on the operator, like how elite you are and how awesome you are. Whereas adversary simulation, your job is to be as transparent as possible. You're not doing what you would do. You're not writing code that you would execute. You're writing code that emulates what the adversary would has done. So you kind of have to throw away all your preferences and start like getting away from all of the biases that you have as an operator or an assessor and kind of think, what is the most truest implementation of the behavior that I'm emulating? Big lesson learned, I said, from the Microsoft process crash thing was don't fix things that aren't broken. You might see something that you think is broken, like, hey, I wouldn't do it like that. I don't understand why they did it like that. But more realistically, these are professional adversaries. There's a reason they decided to make that decision choice. So don't take it upon yourself to fix things or think that you know the right way to do things. Be very true to the intelligence. Kind of like take what you've learned and apply that to the assessment, because that's really what, like I said before, that's what makes the emulation special is the diversity and the actual taking not just carving process injection down to a bunch of different implementations, and that every adversary and every malware has its own specific implementation. And this is also really great too, is like just as an operator, it's a learning opportunity. You got to be willing to learn and try new things. Like I said, it might not, it's kind of like green eggs and ham, and not to be corny, but like you kind of have to be willing to open up and say like, hey, I wouldn't have done it this way. Like whether or not I agree with it or not, this is a really interesting implementation of a technique that I should adopt. And maybe along the way, you'll see the benefit and kind of understand why they decided to do it like that. And also, like I said, getting back to the second point, you've done so much work up to this point to kind of understand the adversary. Like in most cases, we always laugh. We have we call it like Stockholm syndrome. Like you know so much about the adversary, you're kind of in their headspace, and you have such an appreciation for them. So really, just trust yourself. Like you said, you've done so much research. Why not just follow the roadmap that you already outlined about this adversary? And like I said, in some cases, there might be, as you translate from doing research to actually implementing code, there might be small gaps to fill in. Like you said, you might not, during like process injection, there might be like one little decision point that you didn't consider. So there might be opportunity to circle back. But in my experience, these have been really great. As you said, like you said, you can do very tailored research to answer a very particular question, but also ask around. Like you said, you reach out to the author of the report, say, hey, I was looking at this report and there's like one particular thing I'm interested in. Because very often you'll get more of an answer than you expected. Like so that'll open up a whole wealth of new resources that you didn't really consider. But then end of the day, like I said, we try to make educated guesses where possible. Like I said, try to focus everything based on real intelligence, but sometimes they're just not intelligence for what you're trying to emulate. So biggest lesson, or I've had kind of distilled on me, is think about like, would the adversary actually do this? Like you said, at this point, you know so much about the adversary and how much risk they're willing to take and like kind of their style of development. You can kind of make a good assessment on like, is this realistic compared to what they would really do? So finally, just in conclusion, important takeaways, like I said, adversary simulation really impactful, and we've had a lot of great success and a lot of good application of attack via adversary simulation. But also, more importantly, like, it's a lot of fun. Like I said, it's not a hard problem where you're trying to like solve something objective. It's very subjective balance of like a lot of really interesting skills. Like I said, like you're not just, it kind of rounds you out as security practitioners. You're not just solving some linear problem. You're doing research, you're doing code development, you're doing some reverse engineering, you're doing some marketing. So obviously you have to you pick an adversary, you kind of have to sell people on why that adversary matters. So it really does. It's a really really advantageous, really enjoyable experience. And then, like I said, final point is it's not an exact science. There's no right and wrong adversary simulation. It's just kind of doing whatever makes sense based on your use case. The biggest thing is to learn, share, and get better as you go. So I'll leave this final slide up for a second. This is just some links on attack stuff that I didn't mention throughout. So top one, we have attack. Our link to attack evaluations, the second one. navigators, I think I talked about with the annotating layers or making your own matrix of colors and stuff. We have our sightings program, which is the way we address biases and intelligence. We have a program for collecting and harvesting and kind of analyzing what real adversaries are doing in the wild. So definitely check that out if that's interesting to you. We have our Medium page, which we put a lot of writings on, adversary simulation, but also just various attack usages. So check that out if you're interested. And then final link in the bottom is George and I were talking about before, attack arsenal. So where you're going to find our most recent emulation plan. So that slide I showed with AP29. So definitely go check that out there. But I think I just might have went a minute over, but this time I can.
You're fine. That was awesome. Thank you so much. Lots of good feedback on all the references. I personally cracked up on the cheap dating advice one, but I saw that that all of them are very Grimm related and
yeah.
and all that. That's awesome. Thank you for taking the time. I know you're also coaching one of the speakers, and it's really important to make these presentations kind of like fill the theme of the particular conference. So we always appreciate that. It shows the speakers are taking the time and to do that. So appreciate all that. Have a couple of questions here if you don't mind.
Yeah.
We have a few minutes before our next speaker, so might as well take advantage while you're here.
Yeah, go for it. Happy to help.
Right. So there was actually two related to the Intel bias that you mentioned. So I'm just going to throw both of them out because I think you can probably wrap them together into one answer. So one is, how do you deal with the Intel bias in drafting an emulation plan? In the end, you want to cover some of the gaps in the reporting as well. And in our planning, we found Intel bias isn't always driven by motivation of the analysts, of the analysis team, but skill set. Maybe the bias, is not covered there, or it is. So can you talk a little bit more into that? I think our participants would love to hear.
Yep, it's like this is down to a lot of the bread and butter of MITRE. Like I said, we're a very research-oriented organization. So like I said, this is a perfect conversation. Like I said, when it comes to emulation, like I said, you can only emulate what you can see. So you're really kind of driven by what intel is available. Well, addressing these biases, like you said, I don't think it's a malicious thing. Like I said, it could be just an adversary or a reporter got a hold of some type of intelligence. They reported it to the best of their ability. So you kind of have to factor that in as you're like digesting things. And the biggest principles I can share there are trust but verify. It's like you said, if you see some intelligence, seems good. Like I said, definitely account it. Like I said, it's good to keep note of that, but also like you kind of have to be aware of, well, looking at kind of like take apart the report and say, sometimes they'll show like, the raw data that they're looking at and kind of say like a lot of analyze their analytic judgment, say, hey, based on what they're seeing through their conclusions makes sense. And also look at other vendors and say, oh, are other vendors saying the same thing about, that they might have got a hold of the same sample or seen the same adversary in action, kind of like looking to look across industry and saying, okay, is this kind of a shared sentiment, or is this one report, are they kind of like the outlier? They're saying something that most people don't agree with. But also, like I said, I think a lot of it's getting your hands dirty. And like I said, I've seen reports where it said adversary did this, and like a lot of times you go and trust it and you go to implement it and you're like, well, that just doesn't work. Like that API call doesn't do what they said it does. So you kind of have to be willing to circle back and like talk with people and say, hey, I know the report said this, but like, is there a possibility that it was maybe this, or maybe I'm just doing it wrong, and maybe like I need to level up and learn a little bit because the report says this, the analyst said this, and maybe I'm the one, the deficiency here, that I need to learn a little bit and figure out how exactly this works, because just kind of following intelligence hasn't really led me to the right place. But long story short, like I said, it's the same with anything in the research process. It's basically just keep poking at things and keep digging until you really are like confident in the decision you come to.
Awesome. Well, thank you. See some other questions here. I think you could probably take this one quite easily. I already answered, but we'll get your opinion. The question is adversary emulation synonymous to thermal tuning?
Oh man, I'm not going to cheat and look at your answer. I think we're on the same page here, though. I think I would love to see the Venn diagram. I don't know how they overlap. I don't think they're not synonymous. Long story short, I think they're often executed in tandem. Like I said, I think adversary emulation is how you execute the red team. So you're really saying, I'm going to focus on the intel. whereas purple teaming is another way to implement a red team. So basically the story there is, I think you're talking about it later tonight. I'm actually looking forward to that. But it's more of an adoption of communication. Like, we're going to execute a red team, but we're not just going to like do what we do. We're going to talk to the blue team the whole time and kind of build this like communicative, transparent like ecosystem where, we're competing, we're blue versus red, but we're also competing in a very positive, constructive way where, hey, I'm going to show you exactly what I'm doing, and I want you to level up and beat me so that I have to beat myself. So I think, like I said, they're kind of, they're not apples and oranges, but I definitely wouldn't say they're competitive ideas. Probably more often than not, like I said, even in attack evaluations, we execute, it's a purple team style adversary simulation engagement.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I love when I'm on the same page with someone from MITRE. But yeah, we'll definitely talk more about that later today in the purple team talk. But yeah, I mean, you're right on, right? Like adversary emulation can be done both in a red team method where the blue team has zero knowledge about it. Obviously, like the head of the SOC would know, or the CISO would know, but the main people hands on keyboards aren't aware that it's an exercise, and it's more to measure their response if a real adversary were to occur. And then purple teaming is just like you said, the red team instead of doing everything and then showing the blue team at the end, you can break it up in attack chains and say only replicate, like what in your attack eval terms, like step 12, you would do step 12, and then the blue team would look and see how they caught that. So kind of what you're doing is very purple team, but it's also adversary emulation. And I always appreciate the question because I think all of us need to use the same language there. Now, a lot of my friends say I'm all about hype, and I do like hyping things up. And I don't think you really mentioned it, but you are working on this awesome project, right? We talked about attack evals. What threat actor are you working on now, and what are you thinking about it? What can you say?
Awesome. Like I said, we can't say too much because, like I said, there's a lot riding on this one. But we have chosen Carbonec and Fin 7 for the next round. So familiar with this? Like I said, 3 and 29 are more of the state-sponsored nation-state actors. Carbonec and Fin 7 are a little bit more on the financial crime group side. So very interesting. Like I said, that the whole, like I said before, like the uniqueness of each emulation is really captured by like the transition between 29 and Fin 7. So I'm definitely really excited to kind of obviously execute that with the vendors, but also like release that in the public and see what you guys do with it. There's a lot of new little tips and tricks there. It's really neat.
Awesome. I always try. So if you haven't seen me and Jamie, sometimes we just record ourselves over coffee, and I always try to pull things out. You just won't tell me more. I want to know more. But we're very excited. Once again, thank you for your time. I mean, this was awesome. If we're on the Discord, if you want to jump in there, it's again the Expert Track channel. And thank you again for sharing and bringing all these cool references, apart from all the great content. Also gave us something to chuckle about.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was truly a pleasure. Thanks, and I'll hop on Discord and answer any questions there as well. So yeah, looking forward to your talk later.